For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. If I tell you to think of any moment from a running back on September 3rd, 1995, in a game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Philadelphia Eagles, odds are there's only one thing that comes to mind with that highly specific scenario. You're thinking of this man right here and a highly controversial play in the fourth quarter. After 3 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers, where he made 3 Pro Bowls and had over 4,200 yards from scrimmage, the Eagles signed running back Ricky Watters in free agency. And this game against the Buccaneers was his very first game in Philadelphia. It did not go well. And this play right here is the prime example of that. Because with the Eagles trailing 21-6, Watters refused to stretch out for a pass, fearing that he would get hit. Instead of a long gain to possibly keep Philly's chances at winning alive, the pass fell harmlessly to the ground, and the Eagles were dead in the water. Watters was already having a crappy game. He fumbled twice and had just 37 rushing yards on roughly 2 yards a carry, but this play solidified that. And of course, after the game, when Watters was asked about that play and why he held up, he gave just about the worst possible answer ever, and an answer that would define his career all these years later. He said, "I'm not going to trip up there and get knocked out." For who? For what? Watters was an amazing running back, but that one play and those 4 words defined his career. Even despite 5 Pro Bowls and nearly 15,000 yards from scrimmage and a possible Hall of Fame resume, when you think of Ricky Watters, you think of that Bucs-Eagles game and those infamous 4 words. We're not here to talk about that though, because there's a lot of content about that already, and you might have known that. We're here to talk about the other running back from that Buccaneers-Eagles game that day, whose story from the day you probably don't know about. Because this man right here is the running back on the winning team that day. This man is Buccaneers running back Errict Rhett, and just like Watters, he was involved in a controversy on this day where he defied the coaching staff's orders until it got past the point of no return. And the end result? Well, you'll find out in just a bit. Because this is the story behind the Buccaneers running back who was too stubborn to understand Veterans Stadium until he finally caved in. And the running back who saved the day after almost destroying it with a new pair of shoes. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and the man who is the main subject of our story, we need some context to talk about the importance of the game and how the game itself was going. It's September 3rd, 1995. It's week 1 of a brand new NFL season, and we find ourselves at Veterans Stadium up in Philadelphia for this NFC battle between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm not sure how many people are giving Tampa much of a chance of winning this one, seeing as they're going on the road to take on a 7-point favorite, and seeing as Tampa has been the laughingstock of the NFL for over a decade. But this is an important game, and not just because it's the first game of a brand new season, so you'll want to start off on the right foot. Keep in mind that of the 10 teams to make the playoffs the previous year in 1994, 8 of them started 1-0. So even though this was just one game, there was a clear and noticeable advantage if you started the season off strong versus if you were starting the season immediately behind the 8 ball. And if the Bucs were going to win this game and get off to a good start, then they were going to need to have a strong performance out of this man right here. This is Tampa's starting running back, Errict Rhett. And even though there was nothing to write home about for the Bucs offensively in 1994, seeing as they finished 26th in the league in points scored out of 28 teams, there was one bright spot, and that was the play of Rhett. After Rhett got drafted by the Bucs in the 2nd round of the 1994 NFL Draft, the Florida running back immediately burst onto the scene with a strong rookie campaign, where he had over 1,000 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Not only did Rhett finish inside the top 10 of the NFL in both of those categories, but for his efforts, Rhett finished second in the voting for AP Offensive Rookie of the Year, only trailing Indianapolis Colts running back and future Hall of Famer Marshall Faulk in the voting. Now, this was strange, because this was back at a time where you only got one vote, as there was no second place or third place vote, which meant that there was one voter who genuinely thought that Rhett had a better rookie season than Marshall Faulk, which I don't really know about that one. Regardless, you can't take away the fact that Rhett was a really good running back in 1994, especially for a rookie. And if the Bucs were going to have any sort of success not just in 1995, but on this day in particular against the Eagles, they were going to need Rhett to have a strong outing and pick up right where he left off. However, as you can tell from these lowlights of Rhett through the first 2.5 quarters of the game, that did not happen. In fact, that did not even come close to happening. The Bucs found themselves up by 1 point, leading it 7-6, but they were doing so in spite of Rhett, and not because of him, because through the first 43 minutes of the game, Rhett's numbers were absolutely atrocious, as if he was suffering the dreaded sophomore slump all at once. Rhett's first 2 carries of the game went for no yardage. After his first 5 carries, Rhett had 3 yards, with no carries longer than a yard. And through the first 43 minutes, Rhett's numbers were abysmal, as he had 12 carries for 26 yards. That's already pretty bad on its own. That's barely over 2 yards per carry for a guy who had over 1,000 yards rushing and was one of the more feared running backs in the league in 1994. But it gets even worse. If we act like Olympic judges and remove the longest run, which was 10 yards, and the shortest run, which was -3 yards, giving us the other 10 carries of data to look at, just the middle numbers, you have a guy who had 10 carries for 19 yards, or not even 2 yards per carry. Rhett was looking like a shell of himself, and it's not as though Philly's run defense was anything noteworthy. I mean, Philly had a fine run defense. You could do worse, but you could do a heck of a lot better. It's not like we were talking about the 85 Bears here or anything in a similar stratosphere. So why was Rhett running so poorly? Yes, there were some blocking issues and some offensive line struggles, as was to be expected, but a lot of this was on him. There's a real lack of explosion, and there are multiple times, as you probably noticed, where you can see Rhett just struggling to maintain his balance and find his footing. He was stumbling. In other words, he was a victim of the dreaded Veterans Stadium turf. I've talked about Veterans Stadium many times before on this channel, and just how bad of a venue it was for players, especially when it came to the turf, which was so bad that it literally gave players cancer. So if you want to learn more about the Vet and all its awfulness, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Many players faltered at the hands of the turf monster, and Rhett was clearly one of them. The main reason? He didn't have the right shoes on. Keep in mind that Veterans Stadium had just installed a new field, and Rhett had never played at the venue before. So not only did he have no idea how to handle the turf, but the field was already pretty slick as it was. There are specific shoes designed for turf and designed to handle the AstroTurf, but Rhett didn't have those on. Instead, he had on just regular old sneakers or tennis shoes or whatever you want to call them, depending on what part of the country or world you're in. And because of that, as you can tell, he was slipping and stumbling like crazy, unable to do anything of note for the first part of the game, as the Bucs struggled offensively as a team. With that in mind, you would think that the solution here would be rather simple, and this would be a complete non-story in the grand scheme of things. Rhett realizes that the field is an issue and that he doesn't have the right shoes, so he switches to more appropriate and more fitting shoes for the second half and does his thing, right? It'd be very much like Super Bowl IX, where the Steelers struggled mightily on offense in the first half, as the halftime score was 2-0. And then, the Steelers changed their shoes at halftime to better be equipped for the cold weather and the Tulane Stadium field, which ended up working and getting Pittsburgh their first Super Bowl win in franchise history. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And if that was the story here, and that's exactly what happened, then honestly, it's not too much of a story. Guy makes an adjustment at halftime and plays better as a result. We see that all the time, especially with something like this. However, what's crazy about the instance involving the man you've been watching this whole time struggle throughout the vast majority of the game is that the Buccaneers were adamant that he switched to the new shoes. The sneakers clearly weren't working. We could clearly see that. He wasn't the man he was, and the turf was not good for the shoes. Switch to the turf shoes and you'll do better. And amazingly enough, Rhett declined. He refused multiple requests by the Buccaneers to change shoes. The coaches spent the halftime period almost like the parents who see their kid is inappropriately dressed for school and probably needs to put on pants instead of shorts because it's too cold. You need to put on the turf shoes because it will be good for you. And Rhett said no. Even despite the struggles he had being clear as day, and despite a solution being incredibly easy and obvious to everyone with eyes, Rhett was stubborn enough to say, "I'm keeping the shoes I have. The sneakers got me here, and they'll keep me going throughout the second half." Just absolute delusion on his end in so many ways. It's like if I'm trying to win a game of manhunt or hide and seek or anything along those lines, and it's dark outside, and I'm wearing a bright neon shirt that glows up, and I have a black shirt at home 10 feet away, and all I have to do in order to improve my chances is do the obvious thing and put on a black shirt, and I refuse. That is an insane level of defiance and stubbornness, and that's exactly what Errict Rhett did here. Because for the third quarter, when it started, sure enough, Rhett came out with the sneakers on. Despite the wishes of the coaching staff to tell him to put on the shoes, Rhett refused. He was riding with the shoes he started the game with, even if they were useless and very clearly ill-equipped for the game at hand. But after touching the ball twice to start the quarter, gaining 1 yard on one carry, and losing 3 yards on the other carry, also losing his balance, Rhett finally relented. We can only speculate as to why, because 30 years later, we don't know the full details. Maybe Rhett realized the error of his ways on his own, and realized that the coaches and the equipment team knew best. Maybe Rhett was frustrated with himself, and decided that he was going to try some new shoes. Almost like how if you're golfing, and you're hitting it poorly with your 8-iron, you're not going to use your 8-iron for the rest of the round. Or, and this is the scenario I'm leaning more toward without any confirmation, maybe the coaches told him, especially after what happened at halftime, put on the shoes or you're getting benched. Listen to us and put on the shoes made for this field or don't play. Because right now, you're hurting us due to your stubbornness. Again, we don't know what exactly caused Rhett to change his mind and finally relent, but with the Bucs leading 7-6, and with 2 minutes left in the third quarter, Rhett finally walked out onto the field with a new pair of shoes. Gone were the sneakers he started the game with. In were the shoes designed for the Veterans Stadium turf. And what do you know? Rhett actually looked like his old self. Because as you're going to be able to tell throughout the rest of this video, the Buccaneers ended up winning the game 21-6 and starting the season off 1-0. And they did it because of Rhett's strong play down the stretch. Remember how Rhett, with the old shoes, started the game with just 26 rushing yards on 12 carries and just 30 yards from scrimmage? Well, over the final 17 minutes of the contest, with the new shoes on, Rhett had 77 yards from scrimmage and had 59 rushing yards. Instead of averaging barely over 2 yards per carry over the first 43 minutes, Rhett was averaging well over 4 yards per carry over the final 17 minutes. Rhett didn't lose yardage on a single play. He didn't slip once. He didn't stumble once. And he ended up scoring the dagger touchdown with about 4 minutes left in the contest, when he punched it in from 19 yards out to give the Bucs that 2-score lead for the first time all game. To start the game off, Rhett had 2.3 yards per touch. After changing shoes, Rhett had over 5.1 yards per touch, which, safe to say, is a drastic difference. And that is not a coincidence in the slightest bit. The difference in Rhett's play before the shoe change and after the shoe change is like the difference in quality between an original Disney movie and a direct-to-DVD Disney movie. Because after the game, Rhett even said as much, and talked about how the shoes made a difference. As he said, "I had the wrong shoes for this kind of field. I couldn't get any grip at all." He added on his initial problems with his performance. "It's a new track on the field, and I was slipping." But finally, after Rhett relented and made the change, everything magically improved, and Rhett started looking like that explosive rookie that he was in 1994. As Rhett said on the switch midway through the third quarter, after being terrible for the first 2.5 quarters of the contest, "It was just ridiculous, the difference after I changed. I changed to the other shoes, and I felt like I was the fastest thing out there." I know the coaches weren't up in Rhett's face afterwards saying, "I told you so," but you know they had to be thinking it, right? That was the most "I told you so" moment in the history of "I told you so" moments. Almost like the kid who feels warm after getting a jacket. And it would be a pretty good omen of things to come, as Rhett finished that 1995 season with over 1,200 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns, finishing 7th in the league in rushing yards and 4th in rushing touchdowns, improving in both of those categories compared to an already strong 1994 season. Over the course of the 1995 campaign, we definitely got more of the Rhett that ended the Eagles game, and not the Rhett that started it. So as a word to the wise, if there is a moral to this story, the moral is to wear the appropriate clothing. And when it's very clear that you're fighting an uphill battle and it's not going to work out, don't be so stubborn that it costs your team the game and puts you in the doghouse with the coaching staff. These equipment personnel members know what they're doing. If they're telling you to wear a certain piece of equipment to improve your play, you should probably do it, especially if the strategy you're working with right now clearly isn't working. Errict Rhett almost cost his team the game because of his stubbornness and his defiance to change to the shoes at halftime. But once he relented, whether it was on his own accord or through a threat by the coaching staff, which we'll never know the answer to, the Bucs played better, Rhett played better, and everything worked out in the end. But initially, Rhett's response to changing shoes was, for who? For what? Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.